My guest Danny Boyle is an English director best known for his work on such films as Train Spotting, 28 Days Later, Sunshine, and most recently, Slumdog Millionaire. This is actually one of my favorite films of this year. I definitely suggest that everyone out there check it out. I supremely enjoyed the film. It has to do with a young Indian boy from the slums of Mumbai, and he becomes a contestant on the show, the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And Danny Boyle was kind enough to sit down and take the time to join us tonight. So I hope you all enjoy. This is Danny Boyle on Arts and Answers on KCR. Film director Danny Boyle, thank you for joining us here on WKCR.
It's a pleasure. Very nice to be here.
I just want to start with when I was watching the film Slumdog Millionaire. All I wrote on my notes is, I've never cared so much about characters in my whole life.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, fantastic.
When I was watching the children growing up in India, going through these struggles, which, as Americans or Brits, we're just so unfamiliar with. It really resonated with me. First of all, just to step back, I don't want to give too much away in terms of plot. The timeline here is kind of back and forth. So what's your usual elevator pitch when you want to tell somebody essentially what the story is here?
I guess it's a story of a kid, a slum kid, from the slums of Mumbai, India, who goes on the biggest game show in the world, the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he wins it. It's a prize that's never been won before. And naturally, everybody, because he's unqualified and uneducated, everybody assumes he's cheating, that he's got some device hidden in his skin, or pager, or microchip, or coughing accomplice in the audience, all the different things that have been done to win it. But he hasn't. He's answered every question correctly, and it's usually through an experience in his life that coincidentally gives him the clue to an answer, really. And you see that, hence the different timescales that you see. You go back to see him at age 7, growing up in the slums of Mumbai. At age 12, sort of living a life on the run. It's a kind of road movie at that point. And then at 18, when you catch up with him present day. And when he's a chaiwala, a guy who serves the tea in a call center to people. And of course, from the call center comes one of the clues that he needs. And also, actually, from the call center comes his route of how to get on the show in the first place. Because the guy who installed the equipment at the call center also installed the equipment at Who Wants to Be a Millionaire phone center. So he knows how to do that. So there's all these coincidences that apply to his life. But more importantly than any of that, and more important even than 20 million rupees, which is a lot of money in India, and that's the top prize, he's hijacked the show for his own means, really, which is that the love of his life, this girl, Latika, he's lost her in the chaos of Mumbai. And all he knows is that, along with the rest of India, she watches this show. And if he can get on it and stay on it for as long as possible, there's a chance she'll see him and they can find each other again in the city. So I thought that combination of things in that character and the fact that he's such an underdog to begin with was a wonderful kind of journey to make in a film. It gave you a real trajectory. And the city itself is an enormous character in the film and provides this kind of framework which is of enormous melodrama and variation, from kind of comedy to appalling suffering and tragedy to a Bollywood dance routine. And the city just throws all these ingredients at you the whole time. And if you're open, you'll find that you may not have the kind of control that you normally have on a film as a film director, but there are benefits you get in its place of that kind of control instead of continuity and all those kind of things, instead of decent sound. The compensations you get are enormous that you can benefit from.
We're gonna get back to the shooting in just a moment, but let's talk first about the casting. As I mentioned, something just really resonated with me watching these children, the young Jamal and Latika. Tell me about who these actors are.
Well, they're just kids, really, from the slums of Mumbai. And when we initially set up the film and when we financed the film, it was an English script. The script was all in English. And we financed it through Pathé in Europe and through Warner Brothers in America. And when we got to India and we started auditioning, it wasn't really working. The 7-year-olds couldn't really do the English. And it was clear you picked a lot of people speak English there, but it was clear you didn't pick it up until your teen years, really. So the casting director on the film, Loveleen Tandon, she said, you know, guys, if you really want to make this work, you'll have to do it in Hindi. And we all thought, including her, but that wasn't possible because we'd financed the film in, you know, blah, blah. And who's going to watch a film in Hindi in the West, you know, where that's paid for the film? But we did it anyway. Simon, the writer, and her translated a bit of it, and we started auditioning kids from the slums doing it in Hindi, and it was like, just came alive. It was like a breakthrough. Those odd moments where it just suddenly goes, bing, and you know you're there. So we committed to that, and then I had to ring up Warner Brothers. I had this amazing telephone conversation with Warner Brothers where I told them, by the way, guys, a third of the film's now going to be in Hindi with English subtitles, and you can imagine the reaction there. They thought I'd lost my mind. They thought I'd gone native, you know, that I was going to be wearing a kurta and I would be bringing back a film about meditation and yoga. And I said, don't worry, guys, listen. I promise you that it'll be even more exciting with subtitles than without subtitles. And in fact, and that set us on the journey then of doing the subtitles like we do in the film. But most importantly is that it gave us the kids, really. That you gave the beginning of the film this realism, this sense of belonging to the city. And it's horrific what happens to them. The vulnerability of the children and the jeopardy they're in is extraordinarily kind of intense and joyful as well at the same time, ironically. It's a kind of mixture, a combination of things, like so much in that city. One thing just crashes up against another thing. There's no separation between these extreme events. And it gave us the kids, and that gave us the start of the film and put everything in place for the rest of the film. And then they get to 12 and they speak English. Because they're at the Taj Mahal, there's loads of tourists around. They become kind of rogue tour guides, talking to people in English and a bit of German if they need to, you know. And it just makes sense that the film kind of rolls over into English very naturally, or a sort of mixture of Hindi and English. So a lot of people speak Hinglish there, which is this kind of crazy kind of hybrid language that they have. It's such an evolving place. It's extraordinary, India. It's changing. I mean, particularly Mumbai, as far as I could see. It's changing constantly, and yet it always remains the same as well at the same time. It's got this weird duality. And the only thing we could think was the same was the ocean, you know, which is constantly changing in front of you, and yet it's always just the ocean, and yet it's in ceaseless motion, and yet it's always the ocean. India's a bit like that, and you have to compare it to things like the ocean because it's so vast. You can't compare it to the UK. You know, the UK is like just nothing really. It's a city, the UK, compared to India, which is like over 1 billion people, something 1.2 billion people now, and that's enough people for a planet, let alone a country. You know, so it's extraordinary what's available there if you remain open to it in the right way, which is like finding the kids. We tried to do that throughout the film, and it benefited us at the beginning for sure.
Yes, yes. So was this your first time in India?
It was actually. I'd never been. My dad was there during the war because there was a lot of men there during the Second World War waiting to invade Japan. He was a young man preparing a land invasion of Japan, preparing presumably to die. And he used to talk a lot about it. He was there 16 months waiting, and he talked a lot about India, the experiences he had there. So that was my main knowledge of it, except that in Britain, in the 60s and 70s especially, there was a lot of terrible racist humour in Britain, using the Indian and Pakistani communities as the kind of boss of the humour. I mean, it's humour that you look back on now and think, oh my God, that is so racist. You'd never get away with that. But it was mainstream humour then. It was just accepted. And I always remember my dad, because he'd been to India, saying, that's not right. That's not true, that. You know, he'd get really annoyed with the stuff on the television. But no, that was my only experience of it until I went for the first time. And I suppose I'm supremely unqualified to make a film there. But there is something that qualifies you, which is that you are someone who's unfamiliar with the city. And you know what it's like when you live in a city. You take so much of it for granted because you're living your everyday life in it and you're just hurrying to work or whatever. There's so much you don't see anymore because it's just there the whole time, every day. So an outsider coming in can sometimes shine a light on all that stuff. You know, that's the only qualification I could offer as me being fit to make a film there, really, you know.
So when you arrived, what was your first impressions? What was like one of the most striking things that you were like, wow, this is so different, like something that just immediately resonated with you?
Well, The first thing is the smell. I mean, which you can't capture in cinema, of course.
Yeah.
You get these waves of smell, some of which are pretty repugnant, and some of which are just deliciously the most seductive smell of saffron and jasmine. It's just extraordinary. And you realise you're in for a sensory experience, and that's certainly true visually and sound-wise. There's a miasma of sound everywhere, always, constant. The traffic is impossible. You moan about the traffic in New York. You want to go and sit in traffic in Mumbai. It's unbelievable. And they've just launched this new car, the Nano car, which is meant to be a car for the people.
Right.
No idea where they're going to put those cars in Mumbai, because there's no room for any more as far as I could see. Yeah. But they'll come. And somehow they'll find a way through, which is what's extraordinary about the place. But I suppose the thing that, it's the extremes of the city that really excite you as a filmmaker, as a storyteller. Just what's on offer in terms of beauty and wealth and power, and then not so much hunger, but poverty and kind of suffering and physical dispensability, and these two apparently contrary elements, which is that life is incredibly vivid and rich and worth living, and they live it to the maximum, and yet it's also philosophically all life is nothing really as well. It's meaningless really in a way. And they carry these two completely contradictory instincts with them constantly. They're just carried the whole time. And you think you've got to get your head around that really. It's not good going with a lot of Western attitude to it, because the city won't help you resolve any contradictions. But if you approach it from their perspective, you'll see that the contradictions are not to be resolved, they're to be enjoyed, almost in a way. They are the city, and they are the place. And so you try and include as much of that in the film as you can. So the film, included in the film is the blinding of a child, the deliberate blinding of a child in order to make him a better beggar. And then there's a Bollywood dance routine. People say, how can you go from one to the other? Well, it's not a question of going from one to the other. It's you cannot exclude either, because they're both part of the city. And if you want to give a realistic portrait of the city, you've got to include both.
Location scouting. You arrive in India. Did you already know? Probably, obviously, the train station you were going to shoot there, but other locations. Did you know where you were going to shoot, or did you just kind of have this exploring experience where you tried to find spots where you're like, oh, this is it. This is.
Yeah. We did the whole location thing where you. So during the prep period, I'd be casting say in the morning or the afternoon or whatever, and then the rest of the day I'd spend looking for locations. That's basically the shape of your day as a film director, really, as you're prepping. It's partly casting and partly location hunting. You're looking for the right people in the right places. It's as simple as that, really. And you get introduced to the most extraordinary sites, where you want to film, and some of which you can film up, some of which you can't, some of which you can get permission for, and some of which you can't, which is not quite the same thing. Because sometimes you can film without permission and get away with it for a while, and it's weird because the city's changing so much. And there's so many people there. There's nothing really to look at very much visually except people. You've got to love people because they're just there everywhere, building as it is at the moment. They're just expanding the city at the moment. And you've got to kind of embrace the people as the landscape of the film, because that's what it is. That brings its own problems, because in the normal Western terms, people don't want people looking in the camera and things like that. But they're so obsessed with movies. There's a billion people. They're all waiting just to look in the camera if they get a chance, because they have this thing where the gaze is very important. They feel like they always want to catch a big Bollywood star. They always want to catch the gaze of a Bollywood star because they believe there's a blessing incurred from that. And it's the same with looking in the camera. Almost, it's almost like it almost has a special quality for them of looking in the camera. But of course, from our perspective, it's a nightmare. You're not wanting to look in the camera.
Right.
But you just go with it in the end. You can't kind of change things too much. You can't. You'll just spend most of your budget trying to stop people looking in the camera, and you'll get back and you'll find most of them are still looking in the camera. So what's the point anyway? You might as well include them in the film and get on with it. So there's a lovely bit in the film where this security guard, we were filming outside this call center. Call centers don't like you filming them because they're very concerned about their reputation in the West. So we're filming with our little digital cameras outside this call center. We'd shot everything we needed. And this security guard comes up and says, no more film. Hey, no filming here. Put that camera away. So we included him in the shots in the film because it just felt like that's exactly what it's like, guys. So you might as well see what it's like. So we put him in it. And you risk breaking the fourth wall or wherever it is, the kind of suspension of disbelief. But actually, you include it because that's what the city's like. That's what it's like to film in. That's what it's like to live in. And, you try and get as much of that in as you can.
So this is a fictional narrative. This is based on a book, based on a screenplay, adapted from a book.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that there are these elements of realism that are included in the film. Would you say that there's almost a twinge of documentary, like a little taste of it, like sprinkled on top?
Very much more than just sprinkled on top. I think it's very much... The film has its own internal logic and story that you obviously obey. The narrative is crucial to it. But we picked up as much flavour as we could. We set that narrative within the city as much as possible. So it felt like it grew out of the city. I mean, so did Simon, really, in writing the piece. He didn't just adapt the book. He obviously went to India and he kind of explored it for himself to try and use the vehicle that the book provides for the transport for the rest of the city's stories, really. And the book is just a series of short stories, apparently unconnected, but with this central theme in it of a kid going on the game show and actually being able to answer questions, ironically, because of things that he's happened to him in his life, which apparently at the time looked like disadvantages, but actually proved to be enormous advantages to him. And what Simon did, and what we tried to do, is to put this love story right at the heart of the film, so that you'd always have a central spine from which you could elasticate out or bungee jump out as far as you wanted, because the spine would always pull you back in eventually. So that allows you to cover some of the extremes of the city and yet still keep a coherence. It's not a documentary. There is a central narrative that's satisfying and redemptive and joyful by the end. So it feels like a journey, a bit like India, really. It feels like a journey that hasn't ended yet, because our heroes are just 18 when they walk off at the end. But it's got a lot of future in front of it,
Let's talk a little bit about actually shooting and the technical aspect of it. This film was entirely shot on digital, is that correct? Or
Not entirely. It's about 80% of it is shot on digital and about 20% of it on celluloid, yeah.
And so when you were going into like these slums and stuff like that, and there's a scene in the film, for example, where tourists leave their car for a minute and the whole thing is stripped by slum kids. Did you ever have any worries walking in with $40,000 cameras? Tell me about just shooting in the slums and how you went about doing that.
Well, it's the story. The story of the film is that these kids live by their wits, really, and it's sort of in that way. It's sort of like it's got some comparisons with Train Spotting, really, because they're people who live by their wits, really, and I think they're always really attractive characters in films because they're not goody-goodies and they're not kind of pious or sanctimonious. They kind of live. They do whatever they have to do to get by, and it's actually and that's just part of the narrative of drama. It's actually a very, very honest country. I think people were incredibly helpful and respectful to us. I mean, we showed them that kind of respect as well. And it's a very big country as well. It allows you to tell all sorts of stories in there with elements of truth within the story, but there are exaggerations as well sometimes. No, I never had any fear about. It felt like a very safe place to me overall for both crew and equipment. And we were working in the slums a lot, and people have enormous self-respect and dignity, and they feel that their lives are often misportrayed, that often people feel pity for them, and they hate that. They really, really hate that, and they want their lives to be shown as resourceful, as energetic, as purposeful. They operate lots of cottage businesses inside the slums. They're very organised, very communal, very self-supporting, but they don't have much infrastructure. There's no running water, or not insufficient running water. There's no sanitation, and the electricity is kind of like cannibalized from elsewhere. It's not really primary electricity. It's kind of hooked off other lines everywhere. And given those restrictions, they live amazingly organized and good lives, really. And they were very good to allow us in to make our narrative with all its ups and downs of the way that it shows the community. And it doesn't stint showing the poverty and some of the horrible things that happen, some of the shocking things that happen. But because its heart was always in the right place, that it would actually emerge as actually a joyful portrait of the country and the city especially,
I read that in order to kind of decrease your presence, as you mentioned. A lot of people would be looking at the cameras. You did something very unique with still cameras in order to get some of your shots. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we used as well as the main camera that we use, which is just digital camera and then a bit of film camera. We also use this still camera, a Canon EOS 3, which is like a big press photographer's camera. It takes stills. But there's a setting on it that takes 11 frames a second. For you can get about 40, 50 seconds out of it. And it records 11 frames, whereas the normal rate for a film is 24 frames. Mm-hmm. And you can blend those 11 frames. You can multiply them and blend them together in the computer. Mm-hmm. So they feel almost like live action. They're not quite, they're slightly staccato or stuttering, slightly. But they have an incredible high resolution. The color and the focus in them is enormously deep. And it gives you this great sense of a memory, because it's like the film is partly about memories, really, and the power of memories. Ironically, to set the guy free at the end, and he walks off with a girl on his arm and 20 million rupees under his other arm, and it's his memories that set him free, but their memories are very vivid. And we tried to find a way using this camera to show very vivid memories. It also helps us because it's weird the way that people will let someone with a still camera go lots of places where they won't let a movie camera go. So that helped us filming many sequences at the Taj, for instance, Taj Mahal, which is a very restrictive place to film for traditional film crews. It helped us film there. And a number of other places as well we were able to use it.
Mm. Shooting in India, obviously you were working with the powers that be in India. But, I guess when you're shooting overseas, especially in a country with India, and you have so many extras, and they're not even extras, they're real people walking the streets, I guess you didn't really need to ask their permission to just shoot them.
Well, you can't get 1 billion release forms signed, so you kind of have to give up on all that kind of stuff, really. I don't know quite what... because in the West you have to get release forms now for absolutely everybody who even goes anywhere near the camera. Yeah. You can't do that, and it's something that is just the nature of such a crowded place with such a lot of people, that inevitably people are going to end up on camera. The way that my first assistant director, Raj Achari, he ran it, is that he would hire a group of extras. He would be like they'd become not just extras, they were like his lieutenants that he'd send off into the crowd, and they'd take responsibility for like 10 or 15 or 20 people each. And they kind of, while we were getting ready and doing stuff, they'd be briefing the crowd about what was happening. So you kept them informed about, and it's saying to them, if you want to be part of it, do this and do that. And the truth is, people were enormously helpful, really. Even though their instinct is to look in the camera because it is a movie, and Bollywood has extraordinary resonance and power for them. But they were great, people were... Nobody tried to stop us filming, really, apart from call centres and a few other places. The permissions thing is very bureaucratic there. Sometimes you get the permissions, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can film there, sometimes you can't. The two don't necessarily match up, by the way. It doesn't always equally apply. But it's an adventure. You've got to kind of get in the frame rate of relearning the skills of making a film. Because you can't just bring the skills from your other films to it. They're inappropriate, really.
The dance number with the end credits.
Yeah.
Why? What was the idea behind that?
Well, people say, "Oh, that's your nod to Hollywood, is it? Your nod to Bollywood." It wasn't really that, to be honest. I kind of felt I was there for about a year, on and off, and certainly lived there for 8 months solid, in effect, prepping and shooting. And you can't live there like that and not dance, really, because it's such a part of the city. It's just like every other bit of it. It would be like making a film about New York and you never saw a yellow cab. Something in you would go, hang on a minute, hasn't you left something out? Isn't there something missing from this film? It's like, showed a film about America without seeing any motor cars. It would just be like, doesn't quite ring true. And so we felt like we had to have a dance, and we were going to put it in the middle of the film and have this completely inexplicable dance, and then it would stop, and then it would appear to have been an arbitrary interlude. But then you get to the end, and there's a clue that you go, that's why the dance was there. He learnt this from the dance. But in fact, we wanted to keep people waiting for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put it during the end title. So people should, if you can help by telling people not to leave, just as the film ends, to stick around for a couple of moments, and there's an extra reward waiting for them in the end credits.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite parts for sure.
Oh, cool.
Something which I did personally in preparation for this interview, if you will, is on Thursday I actually went and auditioned and was an audience member on The American Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Weird.
Yeah. So,
I've just been with Meredith, who presents it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because they're doing a slot. They're doing a bit of publicity eventually for the Today Show. The two young actors are going to go on the Today Show with her and talk about the film. Yeah. Sorry, go
on. Yeah. So I mean, like, being there on the set is this extraordinary set. It's got these flashing lights, loud noises. It's like you see on TV, except of course it's much more intense in person. And as an American, I was like very not used to that. Like, how do you suppose Jamal, this young street kid, when he's in the hot seat? I mean, tell me a little bit about like.
Well, he's frozen. He's frozen by the kind of pressure of it. You can imagine the pressure of going out there, and especially when the guy. I think it's the second. It's the second question he asks about the national emblem of India, and he doesn't know it, and he has to ask the audience, and so he uses his lifelines, as you'll see if you see the film. He certainly uses his lifelines to good effect, and but yeah, you would be frozen in the headlights of all that razzmatazz, and it's ironic, of course, because that's one of the journeys of the film. You see him at the beginning; he's petrified; he's literally frozen in the headlights of the film. But by the time he gets to the end, he asks the host, "Are you nervous?" Because he senses that the host is all getting a bit too much for the host, who can't believe that this kid is walking away with the show and becoming like an overnight national symbol himself in India.
I mean, for us here in America, of course, you win $1 million. It's huge. Can change your life. But with our economy, you can buy maybe a new house or a new car, and that's about it. But like in India, that amount of money, how is it different?
Well, it would be for someone like him coming from the slums. It would be life-changing beyond description. Really, it would just be so far outside his world. But whatever he could potentially earn. It would be just staggering, really. It's 20 million rupees. I believe it's about $400,000. But you have to compare it to the Indian standard of living, which actually makes it worth must be $30 million. It's actually worth in relative terms, and it's never been won the top prize. The 10 million rupee prize has been won once, I believe, but the 20 million has never been won, has never been touched. So it's a very tough show out there, much tougher than the UK or the US versions of the show. Because they had a lot of very bright people going on it, pretending to be, poor and dispossessed, and actually they were answering loads of really difficult questions like nuclear physics questions and things like that. So they twigged pretty quickly that there was a bit of that going on. So they started making the questions much more difficult. So it's a very difficult show to win. But the difference in his life would be just obscene, really, in a way. And I'm so delighted, really, that's not what the film's really about. Because I think it kind of morally, it would be, if it was just about the money, it would be a kind of tricky one to kind of support, really, because the sudden riches that are offered to people are a complex thing, which can lead to, as we know from some of the people who want it, it's tough to live with it sometimes.
Yeah.
So the real reason, of course, he wins is because he's not there for the money. So he's relaxed. He's not really bothered about the money, which everybody gets so worked up about, losing the money. If they get a question wrong. He's there for the girl. He's there for this idea that she's out there somewhere. She might be watching the show, and if she is, he's got to, in order to give her a chance to watch it, he's got to stay on it as long as he can.
So for my last question, we started talking about these real slum kids who you used to portray these characters. And about the difference in lifestyle that fame and riches can have. So, do you think that you kind of granted these children a little bit of like a not Who Wants to Be a Millionaire winning, but do you think that, like, where are they now? Did they
Yeah,
did
no.
they get projected, to a greater status because of this film?
Well, we've put them. It's not. They won't regard it as that, but we've put them in school.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest thing we've done.
Yeah.
We've put them both. There were two of them from the slums. We've put them both in schools, very good schools, and we've also put in place to pay for that, and the rickshaws to get them there each day, and blah blah. We've paid for that until they're 16.
Wow.
And when they are 16, a sum of money will be released for them, which is again in Indian terms enormous. In our terms, not that much, but in Indian terms, enormous sum of money. And that was done to encourage their families to let them stay at school rather than go out to work at 12, or, which would be something that would be quite commonplace in the slums. So hopefully that will benefit them in the long term more than any other acting work. I mean, I don't know, maybe they will get other acting work, but I think if they were going to get any, they'll have to wait until after the Indian release of the film, which is January. That's when it'll come out there in both the English language version you saw and also in a fully dubbed Hindi version as well.
So wow, so there's the narrative of the Slumdog Millionaire, and there is the real life Slumdog Millionaire. Well,
absolutely, and the guy Jamal who plays him, of course, was sort of from nowhere, really, in a way, and he's been thrust onto centre stage by this appearance in this film about this game show about and so his story is also a kind of rags to riches story in a way. It's really. It's extraordinary, really, But that's why it's one of the reasons he's really good casting. Is that he feels like somebody who has nothing really, and he's got a lot to prove, and he does it. That's the journey of the film. He proves himself.
Cool. Well, Danny, thank you so much for joining here.
It's a
pleasure.
WKCR,
yeah. WKCR 89.9 FM, New York. Thanks so much to my guest, Danny Boyle. The film is Slumdog Millionaire. It's being released tomorrow by Fox Searchlight Pictures. Again, this is one of my favorite films that I've seen this year, Slumdog Millionaire. Thanks again to Danny Boyle. This has been Arts and Answers with Chaim Lazaros here on 89.9 FM. WKCR, please stay tuned for Honky Tonkin'.